Hey guys, tonight we're tucking you in for something a little more chilling than your ex's text at 2 a.m. The daily life of a patient in a Victorian insane asylum. Forget haunted houses and true crime podcasts. This is real horror, but with more porridge and less plot. Before you drift off into sleep, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim those lights, put on a fan for white noise, or just to drown out the imaginary screams, and get comfortable. Maybe double-check your door locks. Just for fun, let's get curious for a second. Have you ever wondered what life was actually like in a 19th century asylum? Did patients ever get a night's sleep? Or was it just group therapy with bonus restraints? Was the food edible? Or would you rather lick the wallpaper? How did you get admitted? Bad luck? A bad marriage? Or just an inconvenient fondness for reading novels? What counted as therapy, actual care, or just being hosed down at 7 a.m. for your nerves? Did anyone ever escape? Or did you just trade one set of problems for a new set of roommates named the Howling Man and Old Lady Who Eats String? And congratulations, you've just woken up in 1886. The air smells like disinfectant, cabbage, and existential dread. The nurse is holding a bucket. You're not sure why. Good luck. You didn't exactly apply to this place on LinkedIn. Maybe you were melancholic, or perhaps your mother-in-law didn't like your poetry. Whatever the reason, congratulations, you're being admitted. The process involves forms, whispered judgments, and the world's least flattering physical exam. Suddenly, your entire personality is up for debate by men with truly unfortunate facial hair. Let's set the scene. It's a chilly Thursday in 1886, and you're standing at the grand, grim entrance of Street Dreadful's Asylum for the nervously afflicted. The building itself looms like a warning. All iron gates, peeling paint, and the architectural style known as Gothic gilt. The admitting clerk greets you with the kind of sympathy usually reserved for old fish, and immediately hands you a quill that leaks ink all over your best, and soon to be only, shirt. The paperwork is intimidating. Forms printed in tiny, aggressive fonts demand to know if you've ever suffered nervous prostration, experienced unusual ideas, or been caught reading novels after supper. If you're lucky, a family member is there to vouch for your instability, usually the one who stands to inherit the good silver. One signature, one questionable story about erratic behaviors, and you're in. The medical assessment is next. And if you are hoping for privacy or dignity, think again. You're poked, prodded, and measured by a physician with mutton chops large enough to qualify as sentient. He shines a candle in your eyes, inspects your tongue, and asks whether you've recently experienced hysteria, vaporous fancies, or the sudden urge to read forbidden French literature. If you hesitate, he writes potentially dangerous on your chart and moves on to test your reflexes with a hammer that's probably never been cleaned. There's also the all-important family interview, conducted in a stuffy parlor that smells strongly of boiled cabbage and suppressed emotion. A committee of stern-looking men, most of whom have never smiled. Take notes as your relatives describe your personality flaws in loving detail. She once stayed in bed past 7, doctor, your aunt announces, clutching her pearls, and she sometimes forgets to smile at the vicar. You're starting to wonder if you'd be better off in the building next door, which appears to be a glue factory. Once your various mental and physical failings have been catalogued, you're weighed and measured for a regulation outfit. An ensemble in a shade best described as institutional drab. Your pockets are emptied, your hair is inspected for lice, and any personal possessions, letters, rings, that novel you tried to sneak in are confiscated for your own good. If you're lucky, you get to keep your shoes. If not, welcome to the Barefoot Club. Next comes the orientation, which is less an introduction and more a stern list of things you should never do, say, or even think about. Rules are read aloud in the world's most monotone voice. No running, no shouting, no refusing your medicine, no questioning the head nurse's collection of taxidermy owls. The staff seem particularly insistent that you not form any unnecessary attachments to other patients, which is difficult since you'll soon be sleeping within 6 inches of them. Finally, after hours of assessment and paperwork, you're led down a corridor of echoing footsteps to your new quarters. The door shuts behind you with the finality of a judge's gavel, and you're left to reflect on how, in the span of a single afternoon, you've gone from mildly eccentric to officially institutionalized. Outside, the rain begins to fall. Inside, the welcome committee, 3 stony-faced nurses, and a mysterious puddle awaits. And that's how you get locked up in the Victorian age. Not with a bang, but with a clipboard, a sigh, and a strong suspicion you'll never see your favorite hat again. As the doors slam behind you, you're greeted by a welcoming committee consisting of a matron with steel hair, an orderly named Big Sid, and a chorus of unblinking stares. You get a lecture about rules, bad behavior, and the unspeakable power of oatmeal. If you're lucky, they'll even let you keep your shoes. Let's take a moment to meet the stars of the institution, your new family, whether you want them or not. At the front, towering over you like a human fence post, is Big Sid, the head orderly. He's built like a wardrobe and communicates exclusively in single-syllable words. Sid's handshake is less hello and more test of bone density. His job is to maintain order, which usually means standing silently in the corner, arms crossed, judging the whole room like a disapproving great uncle at Christmas. Beside Sid stands the matron, Mrs. Grimble, who seems to have been carved from granite and then left out in the rain. Her bun is so tight it may be the only thing holding the top of her head on. She wears keys at her waist, which jangle ominously every time she moves, like a warning bell for anyone even thinking about mischief. Mrs. Grimble's motto, firmness and gruel in equal measure. She's seen it all, and absolutely nothing amuses her. Her stare could curdle milk, and probably has. There's also Nurse Perkins, who is rumoured to have a heart, though no one has ever found it. Her uniform crackles with starch, and she hands out medicine with the enthusiasm of someone doling out parking tickets. She speaks in clipped sentences and has a sixth sense for when you're about to do something even remotely enjoyable. Her chief hobby appears to be confiscating things: extra blankets, unapproved books, and occasionally hope. Floating in the background are the junior orderlies, all indistinguishable in their slightly too large uniforms and an air of mild confusion. They shuffle about, delivering buckets, changing linens, and avoiding eye contact with Big Sid at all costs. Their main purpose seems to be getting in the way whenever you're trying to make a discreet escape to the lavatory. Of course, no Victorian asylum would be complete without Dr. Pemberton, the superintendent, who drifts in once a week to squint at the patients and mutter about modern advances. He spends most of his time in a stuffy office, inventing new moral therapies that generally involve more oatmeal and fewer actual morals. His beard is so magnificent that it deserves its own title and, possibly, its own room. After the introductions, the staff launches into an orientation speech, a litany of rules that cover everything from when to wake up, to where to stand during morning roll call, to the precise volume at which one is permitted to sigh. You're warned against insubordination, absconding, and expressing undue enthusiasm about the weather. All breaches of decorum are punishable by additional chores, a stern talking to, or, if you're really unlucky, another helping of the dreaded porridge. Then there are the daily rituals: bed inspections, meal counts, and the dreaded oatmeal o'clock. Staff enforce these routines with the kind of grim determination usually reserved for medieval inquisitors. The unwritten rule: don't question the system, don't attract attention, and under no circumstances should you mention that the porridge has started to move on its own. And, as you stand there, baffled, slightly itchy, and wondering whether you'll ever see the sun again, the staff sizes you up, mentally slotting you into one of their preferred categories. Quiet one, potential runner, or needs more gruel. It's not personal. It's just that in the world of Victorian asylums, survival means fitting you into a box, preferably one that doesn't rock the boat, set fires, or ask for seconds at breakfast. The real welcome is not in the words, but in the unspoken message. You are here now, and here you will stay, at least until someone loses your paperwork. And so, with one final jangle of keys, the committee disperses, leaving you blinking under the flickering gaslight, hoping that maybe, just maybe, oatmeal isn't as bad as everyone says. Roommates are assigned by the same algorithm that pairs socks after laundry. You meet the whistler, the waller, and possibly someone convinced they are Queen Victoria. Privacy is a rumor. Your new family is loud, unpredictable, and occasionally naked. Let's take a tour of your new living arrangements. Your bedroom is actually a large, echoey ward containing a mosaic of beds, some suspicious stains, and a mysterious draft that always finds your neck. The beds are arranged in a neat, institutional grid, perfect for quick head counts and absolutely disastrous for anyone hoping for a little peace and quiet. Welcome to the Victorian open floor plan. Less loft apartment, more farm animal housing, but with fewer amenities. On your left, you'll find the Whistler. No one remembers his real name, but everyone remembers the sound, a thin, tuneless whistle that floats up and down the ward at all hours. You'll hear it at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and sometimes right as you're drifting into your one good dream of the month. Staff say it's soothing background noise. You suspect it's an ancient form of psychological warfare. Next, there's the Waller, a champion of the time-honored sport of pacing. She patrols the far end of the ward, muttering to herself and occasionally narrating her life like a one-woman Greek chorus. Some say she's walking to calm her nerves. Others believe she's searching for a missing shoe last seen in 1872. Her footsteps are your new metronome, steady, relentless, and oddly comforting, right up until she bumps into your bed for the third time in an hour. Of course, there's always a royal in every ward, someone thoroughly convinced they're Queen Victoria. This queen is partial to elaborate speeches delivered to an imaginary parliament, and demands her nightly cup of regal broth, which is, unfortunately, just the same gruel as everyone else. She often sits regally on her bed, bestowing blessings and side-eye in equal measure. If you're lucky, you'll be promoted to Duke of Blanket Folding. If not, you'll be sent to the tower, which, in this case, is just the corner by the cracked window. Your other roommates include the Snorer, whose nasal symphony can be heard 3 corridors away; the Collector, who hoards buttons, string, and, once, a pigeon feather, all carefully hidden in her pillow; and Silent Mary, who hasn't spoken since 1883 but occasionally communicates with a single world-weary sigh. Together, you form the world's strangest slumber party. Everyone's invited, but nobody's sleeping. Personal space is a concept lost to history here. There are no curtains, no walls, and the closest thing to privacy is pulling your thin blanket over your head and pretending you're on a solo holiday in Brighton. Every night is a new episode of Guess Who's in Your Bed, starring the resident sleepwalker, who drifts serenely from cot to cot like a ghost in a nightcap. Occasionally, someone's nightshirt goes missing and is later discovered on the cat. The noise never really stops. There are nighttime giggles, groans, and the distant clanking of Nurse Perkins making her rounds. If you're lucky, you'll get the bed next to the window, where you can stare longingly at the moon and pretend you're anywhere else. If you're not, you'll be sandwiched between the whistler and the snorer, a combination scientists would later refer to as unfit for human consumption. Still, this is your new family. You learn to trade bedtime stories, share secret stashes of bread crusts, and develop a sixth sense for when someone is about to have a moment. Bonds form in the least likely places, over a shared complaint about cold porridge or a midnight laugh when someone mistakes a mop for a ghost. You may arrive as a stranger, but after a week, you're part of the odd, rattling machinery that keeps the ward humming along. And sure, your roommates are loud, unpredictable, and occasionally naked. But compared to the outside world, there's a strange comfort in knowing exactly where you stand. Together, side by side, making the best of bedlam. Sleep tight. If you can, nighttime is an experience, creaking floors, distant moans, and the ever-present drip of something from the ceiling. Your straw mattress is 30% bugs, 70% regrets, and you sleep with one eye open, just in case someone decides to serenade you at 3 a.m. Let's set the ambience. The gas lights are turned down low, casting trembling shadows across the rows of beds. Someone's already snoring like a broken church organ, while from the far end of the ward, you hear the whistler warming up for his nocturnal concerto. Every cough, every groan, every distant rattle of keys sounds twice as loud at night. Victorian asylums are big on acoustics, a fact you'll appreciate as soon as someone has their first midnight existential crisis in the next cot over. The straw mattress beneath you crackles with every movement, sending up little puffs of dust and the occasional unidentifiable aroma. If you're lucky, you only share your bedding with a handful of fleas and a couple of historic breadcrumbs. If you're not, you'll make the acquaintance of Asylum Mouse, who patrols the foot of the beds looking for dropped crusts and, possibly, lost souls. You try to get comfortable, but every position is either spine-splintering or knee in the springs. Even your blanket, thin as a Victorian alibi, is mostly useful for giving the illusion of warmth. Sleep, as you quickly realize, is not so much a goal as an endurance sport. You lie there, listening to the symphony of nighttime sounds, the soft drip-drip of something ominous hitting the tin bucket beside your bed, the steady rhythm of the waller's midnight pacing, and the occasional shriek from someone deep in a nightmare. Some nights, there's even a chorus, dozens of voices crying out in their sleep, blending together like a haunted lullaby. And then there are the sudden moments of chaos. Maybe the snorer rolls over and knocks his chamber pot onto the floor. Maybe someone wakes up convinced it's breakfast time and tries to start a sing-along. Or maybe the resident Queen Victoria wakes from her regal slumber to demand hot cocoa from the staff. You quickly learn to sleep with one ear open and both shoes under your pillow, just in case. The smells, too, are a character in their own right. A heady mix of damp straw, old socks, and the faint but persistent tang of boiled cabbage floats through the air, settling on your clothes and into your dreams. Sometimes there's a cold draft. Sometimes it's stiflingly hot. But it's always the exact wrong temperature for comfort. You wonder briefly how the Victorians managed to invent the steam train, but never quite nailed the concept of adequate ventilation. Privacy is, of course, imaginary. Any attempt to carve out a peaceful personal space is thwarted by the fact that your neighbors are less than 2 feet away, separated only by a thin, squeaky bed frame, and a mutual agreement not to talk about what happened last Tuesday. There's no closing the door or shutting out the world, just you, your thoughts, and the ever-hopeful wish that nobody accidentally mistakes your bed for theirs in the dark. By midnight, you start to appreciate the small moments. The gentle patter of rain against the grimy windows, the rare, blessed silence when everyone runs out of energy at the same time, and the fleeting comfort of knowing you're not the only one awake and afraid. Some nights, you and your fellow inmates exchange whispers across the beds, swapping stories, jokes, or just complaints about the state of the porridge. There's a camaraderie and shared sleeplessness, a kind of weary acceptance that, while you may not sleep well, at least you're all in this together. Eventually, exhaustion wins. Your mind drifts, the noises blur, and you surrender to uneasy dreams, only to be jolted awake by the morning bell, feeling as though you've barely closed your eyes. Welcome to your first night. A masterclass in communal insomnia, improvised lullabies, and the slow realization that, here in the asylum, night is less a time of rest and more an endurance test with sheets. Sweet dreams if you can find them. If you thought morning alarms were bad, wait until you're woken by a bell louder than your neighbor's leaf blower. It's time for washing, ice-cold water, communal towels, and the faint hope your toothbrush won't be repurposed as a floor scrubber. The day in a Victorian asylum doesn't start so much as it attacks. The wake-up bell clangs through the halls at a volume specifically engineered to rattle bones and shake loose any lingering dreams of freedom. Forget gentle sunbeams or soothing music. This bell could summon the dead, and judging by the faces around you, it often does. You open your eyes to the sight of your roommates in various states of confusion and undress, all shuffling toward the communal wash basin like extras in a low-budget zombie film. The air is brisk. Victorian buildings were experts at trapping cold. The first order of business is personal hygiene, or at least the Victorian definition of it. There's a long line for the washstand, which consists of a bucket of water colder than betrayal, a single chunk of communal soap, and a rag that might once have been a towel, now more accurately described as cloth with ambitions. Washing your face in public, using water that's seen better decades, you attempt to maintain dignity while avoiding eye contact with anyone flossing with twine or scrubbing suspicious stains off their elbows. The water is always cold. Hot water is reserved for special occasions, like Christmas or outbreaks of something with fever in the name. You scrub quickly, hoping to finish before the matron inspects your ears for dirt. A common ritual, and a surprisingly common reason for punishment. Next comes the teeth, or what's left of them. Toothbrushes, when available, are rationed and subject to frequent reassignment. If you're not fast, you may discover yours has been borrowed by the collector, who believes oral hygiene is a team sport. Tooth powder is provided, usually made from chalk and wishful thinking. If there's none left, you make do with your sleeve and a silent prayer. Fresh breath is a fantasy. You focus on survival. After washing, you dry off with the communal towel, which is a generous term for a strip of fabric so thin you can see your future through it. You pat yourself as dry as possible, which in these conditions is about as effective as drying off with a sock. Those at the end of the line use whatever's left, sometimes a sleeve, sometimes just the air. Then it's a mad dash to dress before the ward nurse arrives for inspection. Your uniform, a shapeless, itchy, one-size-fits-no-one tunic, is still damp from last night's wash. Or maybe it's just permanently damp, having absorbed more atmospheric misery than actual water. You jam your feet into stiff shoes, which seem to have shrunk overnight. Laces are a luxury. Buckles are for the staff. Most patients just hope their shoes match and that there's nothing alive inside them. Now it's roll call. Everyone lines up, shivering, eyes half closed, while Nurse Perkins and Big Sid survey the ranks for signs of morning mischief. These include yawning too loudly, missing buttons, or looking even mildly optimistic. Punishments range from extra chores to another dip in the ice bucket, which is how you learn to keep your complaints internal and your enthusiasm at absolute zero. If you're unlucky, your first real conversation of the day is with the chamber pot. With dozens of patients and precious little plumbing, the morning bathroom routine is an exercise in both speed and denial. Buckets are emptied by junior orderlies with iron stomachs and no sense of smell. The scent lingers, mingling with damp straw and desperation, a perfume the Victorians could never quite bottle. By the time the first meal bell rings, you're awake in body, if not in spirit. You've survived the first challenge of the day, emerging, mostly clean, partly dressed, and just hungry enough to risk whatever breakfast the kitchen has brewed up. Congratulations, you're now ready to face another day, and you haven't even reached the oatmeal. Breakfast arrives in a wooden bowl, consistency somewhere between soup and failed glue. Coffee is a myth. You get beverage, which could be tea or could be yesterday's rainwater. Dig in, nutrition is a suggestion, not a guarantee. Let's set the breakfast table, if you can call it that. You shuffle, half awake, into the dining hall. Guided by hunger and the universal law of follow the sound of sloshing buckets. The room is long, drafty, and filled with benches that wobble at the exact moment you sit down. The air carries a fragrance best described as damp hope, with a top note of cabbage and sorrow. The staff, immune to such things, march up and down the rows, ladling out portions with the mechanical precision of people who lost all empathy somewhere around bowl number 6. Your morning feast is a portion of gruel, that Victorian classic. It's technically food, if only because you're legally not allowed to serve anything worse. The bowl lands in front of you with a squelch. You poke it with your spoon. It wobbles, then sighs. The taste is bland, with the occasional surprise, sometimes a lump of something unidentifiable, sometimes a sliver of carrot, sometimes just a hint of last night's dinner, still haunting the pot. If you're feeling optimistic, you tell yourself it's full of healthy grains. If you're honest, you admit it's mostly water and broken promises. As for drink, don't expect a Victorian cappuccino. The beverage comes in a battered tin cup and ranges from brownish to grey, depending on the mood of the kitchen staff and the quality of the local well. The official story is that it's tea. The unofficial story is that it could be anything from weak barley water to whatever collected in the rain barrel overnight. Sip carefully. If it tastes slightly metallic, congratulations, you're getting your iron for the day. The conversation at breakfast is subdued. Most patients are too busy calculating how many bites it will take before their taste buds surrender. Some develop creative ways to make the meal more palatable, trading their bread crust for someone else's apple core, or smuggling in a pinch of salt borrowed from the kitchen during yesterday's potato peeling duty. Others simply stare into their bowls, contemplating the meaning of life and whether a chunk of gruel that bounces can technically be classified as bread. Every so often, a patient attempts to improve the experience by reminiscing about better breakfasts. Someone claims they once had toast with jam, and a silence falls as everyone tries to remember what jam actually tasted like. Another swears that eggs are real and not just an urban legend. Queen Victoria, still regal at the end of the table, insists she's expecting kippers and champagne, but graciously accepts another bowl of institutional sadness when it's clear that's not happening. The real entertainment comes from the staff's relentless optimism. Nurse Perkins strolls down the aisle, chirping about the wholesome, hearty meal and urging everyone to eat up for energy. Big Sid stands watch to prevent any creative attempts to avoid eating, such as hiding gruel in your pocket, swapping with the collector, or quietly feeding it to Asylum mouse. Rumor has it, the mouse is the healthiest resident on the ward. Finishing breakfast is an exercise in both fortitude and strategy. You want to eat enough to avoid the mid-morning stomach growls, but not so much that you're weighed down with a case of porridge regret. There's always the possibility of seconds, but only if someone else faints during roll call and misses their turn. When the meal is finally over, bowls are stacked, cups are collected, and the last globs of gruel are scraped off the benches. You emerge from the dining hall fueled, technically for the day, a little hungrier, a little humbler, and fully aware that lunch is only a few hours away. Hope springs eternal, even if the gruel does not. Your old clothes vanish, replaced with something grey, scratchy, and roughly your size if you were shaped like a potato. Buttons are optional. Style is forbidden. Your only accessory, a name tag, and possibly a mysterious stain. The fashion show begins promptly after admission, and it's less Paris runway and more potato sack fitting with a side of disappointment. Your cherished personal wardrobe, soft shirts, favorite scarves, anything with color, is whisked away with the efficiency of a Victorian pickpocket. You watch as your individuality is folded, bagged, and placed somewhere you'll never see again, unless you're lucky enough to get out before 1902. In return, you are handed the Asylum uniform, an outfit that manages to be simultaneously too loose and too tight. It's constructed of the finest industrial wool, which guarantees it will itch, chafe, and generate enough static electricity to power the lights in your ward. There is one color available, melancholy grey. It's a shade specifically chosen because it looks terrible in all lighting and flatters absolutely no one, not even Queen Victoria herself. The tunic is supposed to fit, but the definition of fit is vague. Too short? Congratulations, you've invented Victorian capris. Too long? Welcome to the mop crew. Your sleeves now double as floor polishers. The cut is shapeless, as if the tailor was actively protesting the concept of waste. If you have hopes of fashioning a belt out of string or a stylish sash from your blanket, forget it. The staff are on high alert for any attempts at excessive individuality. Buttons, when present, are made of wood, bone, or occasionally what feels suspiciously like hard bread. They do not match. Sometimes, the top button is located somewhere near your shoulder blade, presumably to test your flexibility. Ties and laces are forbidden, lest you attempt to escape or, more realistically, tie your pants in a knot that you can't later undo. Most patients simply give up and adopt the draped-in-defeat look. Your shoes are a triumph of utility over comfort. They're sturdy, to be sure, but the soles are as thin as the patience of the night nurse. And the laces are replaced with a single loop of twine that will snap the moment you try to run or even walk at a brisk pace. Socks, if provided, are a medley of holes and patchwork, repurposed from donations that probably originated in the Napoleonic Wars. The scent is vintage, the sensation is trench foot, but make it cozy. Accessories are rare and closely monitored. Each patient is given a name tag, helpfully pinned somewhere visible so that everyone, including yourself, remembers who you are after a rough night. The name tag will occasionally be upgraded with a hand-inked label, "No milk, sleep standing up," or, in the case of the whistler, simply whistles. Your other accessory is a mysterious stain, sometimes faint, sometimes vivid, but always impossible to identify and, no matter how hard you try, impossible to remove. Hats are reserved for outdoor excursions, which means you might, on special days, be issued a cap so shapeless and sad it looks like a grey jellyfish landed on your head. Scarves are contraband, as are ribbons, brooches, and, after one memorable incident in 1885, anything even resembling a feather. The staff like to say that the uniforms are democratic, ensuring everyone is equal, though in reality, they mostly ensure everyone is equally uncomfortable. Sometimes, at night, you and your roommates dream aloud about your old clothes, the way the wool didn't itch, the comforting weight of a pocket, the thrill of stripes. Someone claims they once wore a blue dress, and the rest of the ward sighs wistfully. So you shuffle through your day, swaddled in state-issued drab, style-suppressed, individuality checked at the door. There's a strange comfort, though, in knowing that no matter how bad your outfit is, it will never be singled out for critique. In the Victorian asylum, the real dress code is survive and try not to unravel in more ways than one. Therapy means a doctor quizzes you about bad thoughts while scribbling notes for a medical journal you'll never read. Treatment ranges from friendly lectures to rest cures, which mostly involve lying very still and pretending you're not here. Let's talk about your first encounter with the doctor, a man with a pocket watch, an impressive collection of forehead wrinkles, and a suspicious enthusiasm for the phrase nervous temperament. The session begins with a barrage of questions. Are you ever sad for no reason? Do you find yourself anxious around cabbage? Have you ever experienced an urge to whistle indoors, write poetry, or question the price of coal? He nods sagely at every answer, whether you say yes, no, or simply blink in confusion. Victorian therapy is less about understanding your mind and more about identifying which category of dysfunction you best fit. You're gently sorted, labeled, and slotted into a diagnosis: hysteria, melancholia, or the ever-popular moral insanity, which seems to cover everything from insomnia to not finishing your turnips at dinner. There is no patient confidentiality, just a lot of staff members leaning in as your symptoms are read aloud, like the weather forecast. The main treatment on offer is the rest cure, which is exactly what it sounds like, unless you're picturing something relaxing. Rest cure means you are confined to bed, forbidden from reading, writing, or even excessive talking, and strongly encouraged to stare at the ceiling for 8 hours a day. It's the Victorian solution for everything: anxiety, heartbreak, and the scandalous act of having too many opinions. The goal is to calm the nerves, though what it mostly does is encourage you to practice creative forms of not losing your mind while lying perfectly still. If rest doesn't do the trick, there's always hydrotherapy. This involves being immersed in a tub of cold water, sprinkled with encouragements like, "This will do you good," and "Don't fight the straps." Sometimes you're hosed down while sitting in a chair, the 19th century equivalent of, "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" The theory is that water soothes troubled spirits. The reality is that it mostly chills your optimism to subarctic levels. Other treatments include moral lectures, where a well-meaning doctor or matron delivers an inspirational speech about the importance of virtue, regular bowel movements, and not frightening the horses. You're expected to listen quietly and absorb wisdom like a particularly damp sponge. At the end, there might be applause, mostly from the staff. For the truly unlucky, there are the physical therapies. These range from electric shocks, applied with what looks suspiciously like Victorian car batteries, to spinning chairs that reset the senses but mostly cause breakfast to make a return appearance. Leeching is still technically an option, though the supply of leeches is often outpaced by demand. Bloodletting is recommended for fullness of the head or excess of thoughts, which, in an asylum, is everyone on a Tuesday. Records are meticulously kept. Each session is documented in a massive leather-bound ledger, recording not only your progress, but also your cooperation and degree of gratitude, the latter measured entirely by how quietly you accept more hydrotherapy. Sometimes, the doctors swap stories about particularly interesting cases, and there is a non-zero chance your bad thoughts will be discussed over sherry at the next staff dinner. No matter the method, therapy in the Victorian asylum is designed to restore order and self-control, by any means necessary. Your job is to smile, nod, and avoid volunteering new symptoms, because the treatment for overenthusiasm is another session with Dr. Pemberton's patented silence and stillness regimen. At the end of the day, you emerge from therapy unchanged, except maybe a little damper and a lot more cautious. Victorian-style help. More nerves, less progress, but hey, at least you got to lie down. You're handed a basket, some reeds, and a command to keep busy for hours. Occupational therapy is a lot like working retail, except the customers are imaginary and the pay is worse. Let's set the scene. The occupational therapy room is really just a slightly warmer corridor with a few splintery benches and an enthusiastic staff member named Miss Tiddle. She greets you with a smile that says, "I'd rather be knitting," and presents a pile of reeds, a half-finished rug, and, for the advanced patient, a daunting stack of unspooled yarn. Around you, patients sit hunched over various projects, some braiding, some knotting, some just staring at their hands in the hope that this counts as meaningful occupation. Basket weaving is the gold standard of asylum activity. Every morning, a fresh bundle of reeds appears, sourced from a mysterious location nobody's ever seen. You are shown the basic technique, over, under, and encouraged to lose yourself in the work. The problem is, after 5 minutes, your hands are sore, your basket looks like a haunted bird's nest, and the only thing you're losing is your patience. Still, you soldier on, motivated by the knowledge that anyone caught slacking will be conscripted into sock darning, which is the Victorian equivalent of time out. For those not trusted with sharp reeds, there are endless wool projects, unraveling balls, re-rolling balls, and the important job of removing lint from blankets with a comb that predates the invention of comfort. The whistler is, for some reason, in charge of untangling string, a task he performs with more focus than he's ever given to personal hygiene. The collector, meanwhile, has developed a business trading nicely woven potholders for scraps of bread, operating an under-the-table economy that would impress any modern CEO. Supervision is constant. Miss Tiddle wanders the aisles, offering encouragement like, "Lovely effort, and maybe next time aim for round." She's armed with a notebook for tallying both progress and attitude. Should you attempt to socialize, her gaze sharpens. Occupational therapy, after all, is not about fun. It's about the noble pursuit of keeping hands busy and minds, theoretically, quiet. If you accidentally create something useful, it's quietly appropriated for staff use. Wobbly baskets end up in the kitchens, and lumpy scarves make their way onto the necks of particularly unlucky orderlies. There's also the great puzzle of productive silence. Occupational therapy isn't just about making things, it's about making them quietly. Conversation is allowed, but only if it's in soft voices and limited to topics like the weather, the merits of different straw, or how to hide your blisters from Nurse Perkins. Gossip is strictly forbidden, which guarantees that it flourishes anyway, woven invisibly into every potholder. Some patients take a creative approach to the monotony. The Waller weaves in Morse code messages. The Queen constructs a crown from surplus reeds, and Silent Mary produces an endless chain of finger-knitted rope, presumably for her eventual escape. No one questions it. The goal is to keep moving, keep weaving, keep pretending this is all part of a grand recovery plan, and not simply an elaborate way to keep you from staging a revolt before lunchtime. The room grows hot and stuffy. Your fingers ache, your mind wanders, and you wonder if you'll ever look at a basket again without flashbacks. Occasionally, a finished project is held up for inspection, and if it's especially misshapen, it's returned for improvement, which is Asylum code for keep busy another hour. You're praised for effort, never for creativity. By the time the bell rings for lunch, you've woven, knotted, and unraveled your sanity into a loose, decorative fringe. Occupational therapy, keeping hands occupied, minds distracted, and the illusion of productivity alive in the world's bleakest craft circle. And who knows? Maybe tomorrow, your basket will finally be round. But don't count on it. Lunch arrives, grey stew, stringy meat, and bread you could use as a weapon. Chewing is optional, digestion is a challenge, and flavor is strictly prohibited. You shuffle into the dining hall where optimism goes to die. The room is filled with long wooden tables, benches polished smooth by generations of shifting, sighing, and quiet despair. The walls are decorated with nothing, just plain, institutional beige, occasionally adorned by a crack or an unidentifiable splatter. You take your seat, guided by fate or by the looming presence of Big Sid, who watches to ensure no one gets clever and makes a run for the doors before mealtime officially begins. The servers arrive, orderlies in aprons, wielding ladles like medieval weaponry. With a practiced flick of the wrist, they slop the grey stew into your bowl. It splashes, steams, and immediately begins to form a thin, suspicious skin. You're not sure if it's mutton, beef, or something that once roamed the grounds under cover of darkness. The aroma is faintly meaty, with undertones of boiled root vegetables and a vague, lingering scent that can only be described as Tuesday's regrets. Your spoon bends slightly as you attempt to investigate what lies beneath the surface. Occasionally, you hit a chunk of potato, a sliver of carrot, or a piece of meat that requires a note from your dentist. It's a game of chance. Will today's stew be more liquid gravel or runny cement? At least it's warm, which is about all anyone can say in its defense. The bread, however, is in a category all its own. Sliced with what appears to be a saw, the crust could be used to patch the roof in a pinch, and the center is so dense it absorbs sound. You give it a tentative bite. The resulting crunch echoes through the hall, startling the more delicate diners. You could attempt to soak it in your stew, but it will only absorb moisture at the glacial pace of Victorian bureaucracy. Drinks are a roll of the dice. Sometimes you get a cup of watery broth. Sometimes it's tea brewed from herbs and disappointment. Occasionally, you're treated to milk, which may have met a cow at some point in the past. You learn quickly to check for floating particles and to avoid anything with a suspicious shimmer. The conversation at lunch is as bleak as the food. People chew in silence, trading glances, and occasionally swapping horror stories about previous meals. Remember the time the turnip bit back? Do you think this is the same meat from last week? Even Queen Victoria, who has the highest standards of anyone in the ward, just stares at her bowl and sighs. We are not amused. Every so often, someone tries to get creative. The collector has a secret stash of salt pilfered from the kitchen. The Waller experiments by adding a wilted leaf or two from the yard, hoping for a burst of flavor. These efforts are not encouraged by the staff, who view seasoning as the first step toward moral decline. Still, a few daring souls persist, inventing dishes like stew a la smuggled onion or bread pudding surprise. The surprise being you'll need dental work. Digestion is another battle entirely. After lunch, the ward is filled with a symphony of stomachs groaning in protest. Some take to pacing, others to napping, and a select few attempt to trade uneaten chunks for favors. A black market fueled by desperation and a shared nostalgia for edible food. By the time the meal ends, you're left with a bowl to scrape, a tooth to wiggle, and a new resolve. Survive until supper, where you'll repeat the process with slightly different shades of beige. In the world of the Victorian Asylum, food is less about nourishment and more about endurance. Flavor is forbidden, but fortitude is mandatory. You push your bowl away, wipe your mouth, and make a mental note. Tomorrow, bring extra bread. If nothing else, it makes an excellent doorstop. Bathing happens weekly, or when the staff can't stand the smell anymore. The water is cold, the soap is communal, and privacy means a curtain that doesn't actually close. Let's paint the scene. It's bath day, which arrives with all the joy and anticipation of a dental appointment at the butcher's. You're marched, single file, to the hygiene suite, a converted storage room with peeling walls, a window stuck permanently ajar, and a large, battered copper tub as the centerpiece. If you're lucky, you get called early, before the water graduates from freshly drawn to faintly grey with a hint of disappointment. If you're not, your bath is a lukewarm broth of mystery flakes, floating hair, and other people's decisions. Bathing in the Victorian Asylum is a group effort, by which I mean group humiliation. The tub sits at the centre of the room, surrounded by 3 screens, none of which quite reach the floor or meet in the corners. The curtain's main purpose is not privacy, but to provide Nurse Perkins with an obstacle to glare around while making sure no one tries to drown out of protest. Soap is communal, a sliver that started life as a robust bar, but has been whittled down to a translucent shard. It slides across your palm like a greased eel and is shared between everyone on your ward. If you're fortunate, you'll get to it before the collector, who is rumoured to squirrel away pieces of soap the way other people hoard loose change. Shampoo? Not invented yet. The most you can hope for is a half-hearted rinse and a quick splash of eau de institution. The water itself is a test of endurance. Staff claim it's cold for health reasons. Something about invigorating the nerves and strengthening the moral fibre. Really, it's just because heating water for 50 people is nobody's favourite job. The chill hits you like a Victorian tax bill, sudden, bracing, and inescapable. You gasp, fumble, and perform the world's fastest bath, scrubbing briskly as Nurse Perkins counts down the seconds like a drill sergeant at a hygiene boot camp. Hair washing is a monthly event, which is probably for the best, considering the soap's condition. The process involves tilting your head over a bowl while an orderly ladles water over you from a safe distance. It is rumoured that the Whistler once went 3 months without a proper rinse and began to grow a fringe of moss. No one's willing to check if that's true. Towels are distributed at the start, collected at the end, and smell mostly of starch, desperation, and a hint of whatever was last boiled in the laundry room cauldron. They're thin, scratchy, and so small you have to choose between drying your top half or your dignity. Some patients, embracing innovation, simply flap their arms in the drafty corridor and hope for the best. Nails are inspected weekly, usually with a scowl and a warning. Toothbrushing happens after meals, using bristly communal brushes and tooth powder that could strip paint. You learn to guard your spot in line and to never, under any circumstances, drop your toothbrush on the floor. If you do, the collector will claim it, and you'll be brushing with your finger for a month. And then, of course, there's the matter of laundry. Uniforms are washed weekly in the same cauldron as the towels, which ensures everything comes out the same colour and slightly less filthy than before. Underwear, if you have it, is a rare and valuable commodity, often traded for bread, favours, or simply hoarded as a sign of status. So you shuffle away from bath times slightly cleaner, mostly colder, and with a renewed sense of camaraderie. Hygiene here is not so much about getting clean as it is about surviving the ordeal, maintaining some basic sense of dignity, and, if possible, emerging with your name tag still attached. Congratulations, you've survived the weekly war against grime. Victory is temporary, but the memory of that cold water will linger for days. If you're well behaved, you get yard time. The gardens are less therapeutic and more mud with benches. You can walk in circles, dodge pigeons, and ponder escape, but don't get caught daydreaming. That's grounds for more therapy. The first time you step outside, it's almost disorienting. The air smells faintly of damp grass and manure, which is still an improvement over boiled cabbage and communal socks. Sunlight, when available, is a rare and dazzling guest, filtered through clouds that look like they were drawn by someone with a grudge against cheerfulness. The yard itself is a patchwork of trodden earth, battered weeds, and the occasional patch of flowers valiantly clinging to life next to a suspicious puddle. If you're lucky, you'll spot a lone dandelion and contemplate whether or not it's edible. It is. It just tastes like yard. The perimeter is enclosed by a tall, severe fence with spikes on top and ivy attempting a slow-motion jailbreak. Benches, positioned at mathematically precise but emotionally discouraging intervals, are available for sitting, sulking, and the occasional nap if you've mastered sleeping upright. Don't get too comfortable. Big Sid patrols the paths, looking for anyone who appears too happy or suspiciously relaxed. Contentment, in the Victorian asylum, is often viewed as an early symptom of delusion. Yard time is a ritual. The ward is marched out in a loosely supervised herd, encouraged to take the air and enjoy the therapeutic benefits of nature. Translation: get some exercise, but don't get any ideas. Walking in circles is popular. You can pace the edges, eyes down, boots sinking gently into mud with every step. Sometimes you strike up a quiet conversation with a fellow patient, usually about the weather, the day's gruel, or, on really wild days, a detailed review of pigeons and their criminal activities. Pigeons are the real winners here. They strut around like minor nobility, expertly dodging thrown crusts and pecking at anything even vaguely edible. The collector has named several: Lord Peckerton, Lady Flap, and Admiral Beak. Feeding the pigeons is strictly forbidden, which of course makes it the unofficial national sport of the asylum grounds. If you're more of an adventurer, you might explore the corners of the garden, which yield treasures such as a smooth stone, a wilted feather, or a mysterious tin button. You pocket these finds like souvenirs from a strange vacation you never planned. The whistler prefers to pace in perfect squares, while the queen delivers impromptu speeches to the shrubbery about empire and etiquette. The waller, true to her title, hugs the fence, peering through gaps to watch the world on the other side. A horse cart, a distant child, clouds moving in slow procession, but don't be fooled by the open space. The staff have eyes everywhere. Try to climb the fence, and you'll be intercepted by Nurse Perkins, who seems to materialize from thin air, armed with stern warnings and an extra session of calming rest therapy. Sit too long staring at the clouds, and you'll be gently redirected to a more productive activity like group weeding or the time-honored tradition of picking up sticks. Rumor has it, one patient once made it to the outer gate by disguising himself as a pile of leaves. The plan failed only because he sneezed at the critical moment. Mostly, though, yard time is for thinking. You daydream about freedom, about home, about breakfasts that don't jiggle. You watch the sky and let your mind wander, just not so much that the staff notice. The real escape is internal, an act of hope disguised as boredom, and when the bell rings and you're herded back inside, you take one last breath of the outside air and make a silent promise. Next time, maybe you'll spot 2 dandelions. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll be brave enough to feed Lord Peckerton 1 crumb at a time. Entertainment is limited to hymn singing, Bible readings, and the world's slowest chess game. If you're caught reading novels or, heaven forbid, writing poetry, it's straight to the quiet room. If you've ever complained about there being nothing on TV, imagine Victorian asylum recreation hour. You gather in the day room, a space furnished with several unyielding chairs and a piano so out of tune it qualifies as a percussion instrument. Officially, this is the common room. Unofficially, it's the staging ground for the world's slowest social experiment. How long can a group of people stare at a wall before someone cracks and starts reciting Hamlet? Let's talk options. First, there's hymn singing, a daily ritual performed with the enthusiasm of a rain-soaked parade. The staff hand out battered hymnals, and everyone sings along. Or, In the case of the snorer, snoozes loudly through the second verse. The piano provides musical accompaniment, played by Nurse Perkins, who attacks the keys with the same energy she brings to scrubbing floors, relentless and a bit vengeful. Occasionally, the whistler joins in, adding his signature off-key descant, transforming Abide With Me into something even the angels would politely decline. When hymn singing fails to uplift the mood, it's time for Bible readings. Patients take turns reading aloud, with Big Sid overseeing the process to ensure no one gets creative with the text. After the Jonah and the time-traveling carp incident, the rules are very clear. The Queen insists on being addressed as Your Grace throughout, and the collector sometimes swaps verses for lists of missing buttons, but otherwise, it's a sedate affair. The most excitement comes from guessing whether anyone will make it through Leviticus without falling asleep. Then, of course, there's chess, the official pastime for those who crave action at a glacial pace. There is only one chess set. Half the pieces are mismatched, and at least 2 pawns are made of chewed bread. The current champion is Silent Mary, who hasn't spoken in years but communicates her moves with a combination of pointed stares and strategic sighs. Games can last for days. Spectators place bets on which will end first. The match, or the next round of gruel. But if you crave more thrilling entertainment, say a book with plot, or a poem about longing and existential dread, you're out of luck. Reading anything other than approved moral instruction is considered risky, bordering on revolutionary. Novels are strictly contraband, and the act of writing poetry is treated as a gateway to full-blown anarchy. If you're caught scribbling lines about love, or, worse, freedom, it's a one-way trip to the quiet room, where the only literature allowed is the wallpaper, and even that censored for subversive patterns. This doesn't stop everyone. Smuggling is an art form. Pages of forbidden stories are traded like currency. Folded, hidden in sleeves, or slipped under mattresses. The collector claims to have a fragment of Jane Eyre. The Waller recites limericks during thunderstorms. It's a high-risk, low-reward operation, since the penalty for reading improper fiction is an hour spent contemplating your life choices in a chair facing the wall. Art is similarly discouraged. There's one set of crayons, rationed and watched over by Miss Tiddle as if they were made of gold. Drawing anything besides appropriate scenes, gardens, sunsets, fruit, is frowned upon. The Whistler once sketched a particularly accurate pigeon and was sentenced to 2 days' worth of basket weaving. So, you learn to make your own fun. Shadow puppets at lights out, whispered jokes about Nurse Perkins' piano technique, and the annual contest to see who can balance the most crusts on their nose before Big Sid notices. It's not much, but it's yours. At the end of the day, entertainment is about endurance. Surviving boredom, finding joy in the smallest rebellion, and remembering that sometimes the best stories are the ones you share in secret, 2 lines at a time, while pretending to read the Book of Psalms. Misbehave, and you get quiet time, solitary confinement, a locked door, and a chair that creaks louder than your conscience. The wallpaper pattern may or may not start talking to you. Welcome to the quiet room. Part punishment, part meditation chamber, part Victorian experiment in what happens when you leave a person alone with nothing but their thoughts and an aggressive floral motif. The door closes behind you with an ominous click that echoes down the corridor, and suddenly it's just you, your regrets, and a single piece of furniture that looks as if it's already sat through a dozen nervous breakdowns. The chair, let's be honest, is not your friend. It's wooden, armless, and designed to be just slightly too short for comfort. So your feet dangle like an oversized child's. Every time you shift, it lets out a groan loud enough to make you wonder if you've triggered some hidden Victorian alarm system. You consider lying down, but the staff have thought of that. The only other option in the room is a sad little mat in the corner, thinner than the plot of last week's Bible reading. And then there's the wallpaper. Once, it was probably a lively pattern, paisley, perhaps, or something approximating vines. Now, the colours have faded into a patchwork of sepia and suspicious stains. You try to avoid making eye contact with the section that looks disturbingly like a judgmental owl. After 20 minutes, your mind starts to wander. Is that swirl a flower, a face, or the ghost of some previous occupant's lost lunch? The more you stare, the more it stares back. Quiet time is supposed to be restorative. You are instructed to reflect on your actions. Maybe you read a contraband novel, muttered about the gruel, or organized an unsanctioned pigeon naming contest. The staff insist this is for your own good. A chance to reset your moral compass. What it actually feels like is a crash course in Victorian existentialism. Without distractions, your brain kicks into overdrive, replaying every embarrassing thing you've ever said since childhood, planning elaborate escapes involving the world's slowest chair, and composing sonnets about the merits of indoor plumbing. Sometimes, you sing to yourself, very softly, or count the cracks in the ceiling for entertainment. The record stands at 119, though you suspect the Waller invented half of them to pass the time. Some scratch notes on the underside of the chair, a tradition as old as the room itself, little etchings of hope, frustration, and questionable anatomy. If Nurse Perkins discovers this, she'll deploy the sandpaper of shame. The only visitor is the occasional staff check-in. Nurse Perkins will peer through the little observation window and ask, "Are you calm now?" in a tone that suggests the correct answer is always, "Yes, absolutely. And can I please return to hymn singing?" Sometimes she leaves a biscuit as a peace offering. More often it's just a brisk nod and the sound of the key turning. For some, the room becomes a blank canvas for the imagination. You invent conversations with the wallpaper, assign personalities to the chair, or pretend you're a misunderstood hero, unjustly imprisoned by villains who just don't appreciate your poetry. The Queen claims she held court with a family of particularly sympathetic daisies in her last stay. Eventually, time runs out, though it never seems to run quite as quickly as you hope. The door opens, you're released back into the bustle of the ward, and for a few brief minutes, the chaos of everyday asylum life feels almost comforting. You have survived the quiet room. You have stared into the void, and at least 2 wallpaper owls. And the void politely stared back. If nothing else, you come out with a new appreciation for conversation, company, and furniture that doesn't judge your every move. And perhaps, just perhaps, you'll think twice before naming the pigeons again. Or maybe not. Once a month, relatives appear, stare at you like you're a zoo exhibit, and leave behind fruit or questions you can't answer. You try to look sane for 15 minutes. It never works. The week before Visitation Day, the whole ward buzzes with a peculiar mix of excitement, dread, and resignation. Nurse Perkins makes a rare appearance with a bucket of extra cleaning solution, which mostly smells like vinegar and disappointment. Beds are straightened, faces are washed, and you're issued a cleanish uniform for the big event. Even Big Sid shaves his beard into something approaching civility, though it still looks like it could shelter a family of field mice. On the morning of, the atmosphere shifts. The staff are on high alert, bustling around as if the Queen herself might drop by. You're reminded, twice, about proper manners, positive attitudes, and not mentioning anything about the night the Whistler mistook the mop closet for the lavatory. The goal is clear. Create the impression of a calm, orderly, and moderately happy institution. You and your roommates practice looking content but not suspicious, which for most people involves a lot of forced smiling and staring at the floor. Visitors are led in with the solemnity of a church procession. The room is arranged with uncomfortable chairs set in stiff rows. There's an awkward moment when everyone tries to identify their own relatives, a task complicated by bad eyesight, old hats, and the fact that Aunt Maud has brought a new wig for the occasion. You spot your family, a mother clinging to a basket of apples, a cousin you haven't seen since you were 12, and of course, the uncle who always introduces himself as if you might have forgotten. The initial greeting is a barrage of well-meaning but profoundly unhelpful questions. Are you eating enough? Define enough. Do they treat you well? Smile and nod. Are you making friends? Look at the collector, currently chewing on a button, and nod again. For the next 15 minutes, you perform the delicate dance of appearing healthy, happy, and, above all, not too odd. You discuss the weather. You accept a bruised pear. You insist that the food is very filling, that the beds are reasonably soft, and that you're learning all sorts of useful skills, like how to weave a basket with only 3 fingers and an existential crisis. Your relatives do their best to fill the silence. They discuss news from the outside world, who got married, who got the flu, who fell in the duck pond at last summer's fair. Someone mentions a neighbor's cousin's distant relation who also spent some time in a place like this, in a tone meant to be reassuring, but that lands somewhere between awkward and faintly accusatory. Your mother wipes her eyes, your uncle checks his watch, and your cousin attempts to sneak you a newspaper, which is promptly confiscated by Big Sid. Sometimes, the Queen receives visitors too, a flock of well-dressed ladies who curtsy, whisper, and leave behind handkerchiefs embroidered with messages like, "Chin up." The collector's family arrives with a bag of old coins and a stern warning not to trade them for soup. The Waller's relatives stand awkwardly in the corner, staring out the window as if hoping for a sign from above. Eventually, the staff signal the end of visiting hours with a sharp clap and a reminder to exit in an orderly fashion. Relatives gather up empty baskets, say their goodbyes, and leave with a strange mixture of relief and guilt. You wave, try to look brave, and watch as the door swings closed once more, returning you to the familiar rhythms of ward life. For a moment, the room is quieter than usual. A collective exhale after the effort of appearing normal. You tuck your pear under the mattress for later, smooth your uniform, and share a knowing glance with your roommates. Visitation day is over. The fruit will rot, the questions will linger, but the unspoken bond between you and the rest of the ward, awkward, resilient, and quietly hopeful, only grows stronger with every reunion. Every so often, someone tries to escape, digging, climbing, or faking death. Spoiler: most plans are foiled by high walls, bad timing, or accidentally breaking an ankle during freedom hour. It's a rite of passage in any Victorian asylum. The moment you decide you simply can't face another bowl of grey stew or another one of Nurse Perkins' therapeutic lectures about the value of positive thinking, sooner or later, the thought strikes: what if I just left? What if I slipped out during yard time, scaled the wall, and vanished into the wild world of 19th century England? You imagine it. Wind in your hair, the taste of freedom, or at least non-institutional bread, on your tongue. It's exhilarating, it's daring, and, if history is any guide, it's almost certainly doomed from the start. First, you have the diggers. The Waller, in a fit of inspiration, once commandeered a soup spoon and spent 3 weeks tunneling under her bed. She managed to excavate a hole big enough for a mouse, 2 buttons, and eventually, her own crushed hopes. Nurse Perkins discovered the plot when the floor started to sag, and the only thing that escaped was a gust of cold air and a family of ants. The hole was filled in, and the Waller was put on basket-weaving duty for a month. Then there are the climbers. The fence around the asylum yard is tall, iron, and topped with spikes that have discouraged more ambition than a particularly stern tax accountant. The collector, convinced she could scale it using only her wits and a suspiciously elastic scarf, made it halfway up before realizing she had a mortal fear of heights. She spent the next hour dangling like a very anxious flag, while the staff debated the best way to coax her down. In the end, Big Sid just plucked her off like an apple and sent her back inside with a new appreciation for solid ground. The most creative escapes are, naturally, the fake deaths. The Queen once staged an elaborate demise, complete with moaning, handkerchief fluttering, and a last request for a regal burial. The staff, long used to her dramatic tendencies, rolled her out into the sun for a little fresh air, where she made a miraculous recovery the moment someone offered her a biscuit. Silent Mary, on the other hand, simply lay very still for half a day, earning only a poke from an orderly and an extra helping of soup for her troubles. Occasionally, someone tries the blend-in with the visitor's tactic, donning a borrowed bonnet and walking briskly toward the exit. This works exactly never, as patients are given uniforms so grey and drab they practically absorb colour from the surrounding area. Even the most inattentive staff member can spot an escapee by the trail of dust, panic, and suspiciously rapid footsteps. Once, the whistler tried hiding under a laundry cart. He was found, predictably, when he started whistling. Rumours abound of successful getaways. The man who vanished during a thunderstorm, the woman who supposedly tunneled all the way to the bakery, the patient who escaped by climbing a tree and living as a squirrel. Most of these tales end with a sheepish return, a twisted ankle, or a trip to the quiet room for reflective time. The real winners are the staff, who get to add new stories to their collection and new safety precautions to their rulebook. Yet, despite the failures, escape attempts remain a cherished tradition, a spark of hope, rebellion, and desperate creativity in the face of institutional monotony. Every attempt, no matter how doomed, is a reminder that no one can fully extinguish the longing for freedom. And if you're lucky, your biggest escape will be into a really good daydream. One with blue skies, open roads, and absolutely no fences in sight. At least until Freedom Hour is over, and you're called back for another round of group therapy and grey stew. Not all treatments are created equal. Some involve moral guidance, others involve electricity, ice baths, or being spun in a chair until you swear off having feelings. The cure is often worse than the disease. Let's talk about the wonders of Victorian psychiatric medicine, a field where the scientific method mostly consists of let's see what happens if we poke it with a stick. The treatments are many, and their logic is questionable, at best. You're not here to get better, you're here to survive whatever today's experiment is. First, we have moral guidance. This is the preferred treatment for mild cases. Melancholy, nervousness, the tendency to sigh too often at mealtimes. You're summoned to Dr. Pemberton's office, where you are lectured on the value of a virtuous life, proper posture, and the dangers of unchecked imagination. He recommends brisk walks, porridge, and suppressing unruly thoughts. If you show signs of improvement, you'll be rewarded with an extra hymn at recreation hour. If not, brace yourself for the next tier. Next, the rest cure makes another appearance. This time, it's even stricter. Total bed rest, windows curtained, and any hint of stimulation strictly forbidden. Talking, reading, or even glancing too long at the wallpaper is discouraged. The only thing more soul-numbing than the endless hours in bed is Nurse Perkins dropping by every hour to check your pulse and remind you that fidgeting is the enemy. If you fail to be cured by inaction, the staff up the ante. Enter the ice bath. The theory: cold water shocks the system back to sanity. The practice: you're plopped into a tub so cold your regrets freeze before your toes do. Staff claim it's invigorating, you call it a near-death experience. Your teeth chatter so loudly you set off Big Sid's noise alarm, which results in a stern talking to and, occasionally, another ice bath for uncooperative attitude. It's a vicious, shivery cycle. Now, for those truly stubborn symptoms, anything from persistent sadness to, say, writing limericks after dark, the spinning chair is prescribed. This ingenious device looks innocent. Just a wooden chair bolted to a platform. The patient is strapped in and spun with great enthusiasm by an orderly who missed his calling as a carnival worker. The theory is that spinning redistributes your humors, cures cerebral congestion, and, most importantly, prevents you from complaining, since you'll be too dizzy to form a coherent sentence. The after effects, nausea, confusion, and a newfound fear of furniture. But Victorian ingenuity doesn't stop there. There's electrotherapy, a practice as alarming as it sounds. Wires are attached to your temples, cranked up, and the resulting jolt is supposed to stimulate the brain. The staff explain, it's the height of modern science. You're not convinced. After one round, most patients vow never to have an unruly emotion again, at least not when Nurse Perkins is nearby. For chronic cases, there's the infamous blistering, applying mustard plasters or hot irons to create blisters, under the belief that pain somewhere else will distract you from your mental anguish. Spoiler, it mostly results in more mental anguish. The collector once tried to fake a blister with a heated spoon and ended up getting a stern warning and a day in the quiet room. Of course, all treatments are meticulously recorded. Dr. Pemberton jots down notes with a flourish. Patient exhibited resilience. Patient unresponsive to moral guidance. Prescribed stronger hymns, or the ever-popular patient fainted. Hydrotherapy successful. The ledger is a work of fiction in itself, so you go through the motions, surviving one bizarre therapy at a time. You sing the hymns, take the baths, endure the lectures, and try not to say anything that sounds too creative. Because here in the Victorian Asylum, the line between treatment and torture is blurry, and the only thing you can truly rely on is your own stubbornness. And maybe, just maybe, the knowledge that your great-great-grandchildren will someday be able to Google therapy and not find a spinning chair. Night brings out a different crew, nurses with lanterns, orderlies who never blink, and at least one person who claims they can talk to ghosts. Sleep is optional, fear is required. When the last rays of greyish sunlight slip behind the asylum's walls, something shifts in the atmosphere. The day staff vanish in a flurry of keys and exhausted sighs, leaving you with the night shift, an ensemble cast of personalities you wouldn't trust to watch your houseplants, let alone your dreams. First, there's Nurse Malvern. She's been here since before the last major wallpaper change and is rumoured to never actually sleep. Armed with a lantern and a face that suggests she's allergic to laughter, she glides silently through the darkened halls, checking that all is well and absolutely nothing is fun. She's famous for appearing directly behind you at the very moment you try to sneak a midnight snack or utter the forbidden phrase, "It's awfully quiet tonight, isn't it?" Her counterpart is Orderly Dunlop, a man with eyebrows that move independently from the rest of his face and an ability to never blink during an entire conversation. He sits at the end of the main corridor in a chair that squeaks in Morse code, jotting down mysterious notes and occasionally muttering about the state of the plumbing. He's the self-appointed guardian of the night, enforcing rules about talking, pacing, and, most importantly, smiling after sundown. Then there's Miss Greaves, the night nurse for the female ward, who claims she can sense bad energy and has a running tally of all the ghosts currently haunting the premises. She'll offer whispered advice about appeasing spirits, always leave a crust of bread on the windowsill, and swears the third-floor bathroom is occupied after midnight. You quickly learn to hold it until morning. The rest of the staff are a rotating cast. The young orderly who reads penny dreadfuls by candlelight, the matron who patrols with a wooden spoon, and the sleepy-eyed assistant who is famous for dozing off while standing up. Their supervision is unpredictable. Sometimes they're everywhere at once. And sometimes you could stage an entire amateur production of Hamlet in the hallway without being noticed. Night is when the asylum truly earns its reputation. Shadows move in the corners, floorboards creak, and distant wails echo from the locked wings. Is it a real patient, a particularly vocal pigeon, or something else entirely? No one's sure. All you know is that every sound is amplified. Every footstep seems to come from just outside your bed, and the darkness feels thick enough to be a second blanket. The routine is strict. Every hour, like clockwork, Nurse Malvern does her rounds, lantern bobbing and keys jangling. She pauses at each bed, ensuring all limbs are accounted for and that no one is plotting an escape or, worse, writing poetry. If you're caught whispering, she delivers a speech about the sanctity of night's rest that lasts until you're either asleep or have mastered the art of looking like you are. For the insomniacs, and there are many, night is a time for quiet reflection, small rebellions, and shared stories. Queen Victoria recounts tales of palace intrigue. The whistler hums a lullaby. Silent Mary communicates in dramatic sighs. Occasionally, someone claims to see a ghost drifting past the windows. The rest of you agree to believe it, if only for something to talk about tomorrow. Sleep comes if it comes. You lie awake, watching the play of lantern light on peeling paint, listening for Nurse Malvern's footfalls and hoping the ghosts are in a good mood tonight. The asylum at night is both quieter and more alive, filled with secrets, stories, and the steady heartbeat of a building that never truly sleeps. And as you finally drift off, one eye half open, you know that whatever dreams await, they'll be shared with a cast of characters uniquely qualified to keep you company. Whether you want it or not, your entire life is reduced to a chart with check marks and the occasional improved scrawled in red ink. Doctors debate your fate like you're a questionable cheese. In the grand tradition of Victorian bureaucracy, the most powerful object in the asylum isn't the ring of keys or even Nurse Perkins' death glare. It's your medical record. Every patient has one. A thick, battered folder, yellowed at the edges and bristling with more scribbles than a toddler's art project. This folder travels everywhere with you, shadowing your every move like an overzealous biographer with a limited vocabulary. Your chart begins the moment you walk through the front doors, usually with a statement like patient presented as nervous, pale, and suspiciously fond of bread. Everything you do, say, or even think about doing is documented, graded, and commented upon. Miss Tiddle records whether you finished your porridge. Big Sid makes a note if you attempted escape or looked at the fence for too long. Nurse Malvern, night shift queen, has a section for nocturnal behaviors, which is where the infamous talk to imaginary squirrel incident still lives in infamy. Each new day means more updates. Did you sing during hymns? Check. Did you refuse the ice bath? Double check. Did you craft a lopsided basket and claim it was postmodern? That gets an asterisk, a question mark, and a recommendation for closer observation. If you are lucky, the word improved appears every so often, though nobody can ever explain exactly what it means. Some say it's code for hasn't complained this week. Others suspect it's just what the doctor writes when he wants to leave early for lunch. The real fun begins during weekly reviews. All available doctors gather in the staff room, armed with your chart, a pot of tea, and an appetite for dramatic debate. Your fate is decided somewhere between the biscuits and the third cup of lukewarm Darjeeling. Patient appears to have less nervous fidgeting, says Dr. Pemberton, scratching his beard with a pencil. Or perhaps they're just plotting more quietly, counters Dr. Wigglesworth. whose only qualification appears to be his ability to spell melancholia in 3 languages. Arguments erupt over your progress, defined as anything from spoke one less sentence at breakfast to only stared at the wall for 20 minutes. No symptom is too minor for inclusion. Did you yawn 3 times in group therapy? Into the book it goes. Did you mention missing home? Underlined in red. Show too much personality. By singing, dancing, or inventing a new nickname for the collector. And your case notes will balloon to novella length. The only thing more dangerous than being interesting is being boring. Both get you noticed, but for entirely different reasons. Charts are, naturally, full of contradictions. One day, you are listed as cheerful, cooperative, engaging in productive conversation. The next, you're withdrawn, sullen, potentially subversive. It all depends on who had the pen and whether they remembered to eat breakfast. Even the Queen's file swings wildly between delusional grandeur and model of royal decorum, sometimes in the same paragraph. If you ever see your own file, forbidden, but sometimes the collector finds one, you'll recognize yourself only in the broadest strokes. Mostly, you're a series of boxes, ticks, and diagnoses written in handwriting so illegible it might be in code. There are entries for every fever, every meal skipped, every whispered conversation about the meaning of clouds. You may not control your narrative, but at least you're endlessly documented. In the end, your medical record isn't really about you. It's about the institution's need to keep track of its chaos, to justify its choices, and to remind everyone that nobody, not even Queen Victoria, is ever truly off the record. It's a Victorian scrapbook of your misadventures, a book of blunders, and proof that sometimes survival is just about learning to check the right boxes. Once a week, the director tours the ward. Everyone straightens their sheets, pretends to be happy, and the staff tries to hide anything that screams unresolved trauma. Inspection day begins at dawn with a flurry of barely controlled chaos. Nurse Perkins bustles into the ward with a list of chores so long it would frighten a team of oxen. She announces in tones of dread and urgency that the director is making his rounds today, which is asylum code for anything less than spotless, and we're all getting oatmeal for dinner. Again, beds are remade with military precision, hospital corners so sharp you could slice cheese with them. The collector leads an emergency search for missing socks, buttons, and that one comb that always disappears right before inspection. Pillows are fluffed and pounded, though most are so flat that fluffing is more wishful thinking than action. Even the whistler is drafted into service, humming a panicked tune as he sweeps dust under beds with the speed of a man who knows his next therapy session depends on it. Personal effects are hidden away in the approved drawer. Anything not strictly regulation, unofficial artwork, smuggled fruit, the Queen's homemade scepter, is either concealed under the mattress or sacrificed to Big Sid, who's spent so many years collecting contraband. He could probably open a small museum. Windows are opened for the first time in a week, letting in a chilly gust of fresh air that startles the dust bunnies into hiding. The staff is just as busy. Nurse Perkins inspects fingernails, collars, and attitudes. Miss Tiddle runs up and down the corridors with a rag, scrubbing away evidence of last night's creative expression, chalk drawings, a mysterious shoe print on the ceiling, and one very artistic gravy stain. The kitchen staff trade their usual scowls for forced smiles and put on an extra pot of weak tea in the hope that the director will compliment the refreshments. As the hour approaches, a nervous hush falls over the ward. Patients line up in their cleanest uniforms, eyes wide, smiles forced, and hands folded as if in prayer or possibly self-defense. Queen Victoria practices her curtsy. The Waller stands at attention by the far wall, and even Silent Mary manages a nearly audible sigh of anticipation. The director arrives, a man of indeterminate age, permanently arched eyebrows, and the uncanny ability to appear in 2 places at once. He glides through the ward with an entourage of junior staff, his gaze sharp and his notebook even sharper. He asks questions designed to elicit confidence. Are you well cared for? Do you find your activities stimulating? While everyone tries desperately not to mention the time the gruel tried to escape its own bowl, every detail is scrutinized. Sheets are inspected, floors are checked for errant crumbs, and the bathrooms are evaluated for signs of excess enthusiasm. Someone once polished the chamber pots so vigorously they reflected everyone's worst fears. The director peers into corners, lifts bed skirts, and asks after the well-being of Lord Peckerton the Pigeon, whose celebrity status is second only to Queen Victoria. False cheer reigns. The collector beams with suspicious innocence, the whistler attempts to hum a patriotic tune, and Nurse Perkins insists, through gritted teeth, that the ward has never run so smoothly. Big Sid lurks in the background, prepared to intercept any last-minute confessions or flying fruit. After what feels like an eternity, the director moves on, leaving behind a trail of relief, exhaustion, and a faint scent of lavender from the emergency cleaning supplies. The ward collectively exhales. Beds are unmade, socks are retrieved from hiding, and the Queen retrieves her scepter from under the Waller's mattress. Inspection day is over. The order is temporary, the cheer is artificial, and unresolved trauma is quietly restored to its usual corner. But for a few shining hours at least, everyone was on their very best behavior. And that's got to count for something. The menu is consistent. Starch, root vegetables, and whatever didn't walk away from the pantry overnight. Scurvy is not just a pirate problem. Here, it's a lifestyle. Let's pull up a chair to the grand Victorian banquet that is Asylum dining. Every meal is a roulette wheel of nutrition, with starch as the only sure bet. Potatoes are the star of the show, boiled, mashed, or, on special occasions, simply warmed. If you were hoping for variety, there's turnip, the perennial supporting act, always on hand to remind you that not all vegetables are created equal. It's a humble root, but in the Asylum, it's elevated to the status of event. Carrots make the occasional cameo, lending a splash of color to an otherwise sepia-toned existence. Cabbage appears at least twice a week, usually overcooked to the point where it surrenders all dignity and structural integrity. Sometimes, you suspect, the kitchen just finds whatever's sprouting in the corner and calls it seasonal greens. The bread is legendary, a dense, grey loaf that could be used for masonry work in a pinch. Slices are doled out with the sort of reverence usually reserved for holy relics or particularly rare stamps. Chewing is optional, but recommended if you value your teeth. Occasionally, someone discovers a crust with a whisper of actual grain, which is passed around the table for everyone to admire before being eaten with the solemnity of a sacred rite. Protein is an elusive guest at this feast. The stew, served for both lunch and dinner, sometimes contains stringy fragments that could be meat or could be very committed mushrooms. The whistler swears he once found a piece of chicken, though most suspect it was an unusually tough turnip with delusions of grandeur. Eggs appear rarely, like an eclipse, and are just as likely to provoke awe or mild panic, depending on how green they look. Fruit is mythical. On the rare occasion when apples are handed out, usually after Visitation Day, they are either bruised beyond recognition or so tart they double as a disciplinary tool. Oranges are spoken of in hushed tones, a rumor from another world. Vitamin C is more legend than nutrient, which explains the popularity of creative remedies. The collector chews on pine needles for health, and the Queen leads daily sun-worshipping rituals at the window, hoping to absorb nutrients by osmosis. Drinks are an exercise in managing expectations. There is tea, a term used generously for hot water steeped with whatever plant was nearest the kitchen door, and milk, which sometimes resembles the real thing but usually tastes of regrets and old linen. Water is always available, though its flavor profile can be described as earthy, with notes of unknown pipe. You become an expert in trading. A particularly large potato can be swapped for half a cabbage, while a spare crust may fetch a handful of turnip chunks or, in times of desperation, an IOU for next Tuesday's pudding. Food is currency, and the black market operates with ruthless efficiency. Just ask the collector, who once cornered the market on carrots for an entire week. As a result of all this, health is a precarious balancing act. Scurvy makes its rounds, bringing with it bleeding gums and a yearning for anything even vaguely citrus. Rickets lurks in the corners, waiting for the sunless and the unlucky. Yet, hope persists. Every meal is a chance for a miracle, or at least for a potato that doesn't taste like sadness. And so, 3 times a day, you gather with your fellow inmates, share jokes about the stew's mysterious contents, and dream of meals you once had, or might have again someday. Because in the asylum, the diet may be bleak, but the human appetite for hope is surprisingly well fed. Religious instruction is compulsory, and comfort is optional. Chaplains deliver sermons about hope and sin, but you suspect they're really just here for the warm chapel. Every few days, you're herded from the ward down the chilly corridor and into the asylum's chapel, a stone room with uncomfortable benches, stained glass that's mostly plain, and a draft that seems intent on freezing any sinful thoughts straight out of your head. The promise is spiritual nourishment, though the reality is more mandatory meeting with moral undertones. Still, the chapel is the only place in the building with halfway decent acoustics and a faint smell of beeswax instead of boiled turnip, so you take your comforts where you can. The service begins with a hymn, chosen for its length rather than its popularity. You sing, or at least mouth the words, alongside a dozen other voices, some off-key, some enthusiastic, most just trying to get through to the amen. The piano wheezes along, bravely supported by the Queen, who claims to have been taught by a bishop and never misses a chance to add her own improvements. Occasionally, the whistler is allowed to contribute, though his signature style tends to unsettle the more devout. Then comes the main event, the sermon. The asylum chaplain, Reverend Fairchild, a man with a cravat so tight it might be structural, steps up to the pulpit. His sermons are a mix of fire and brimstone, weather commentary, and extended metaphors involving sheep, weeds, and, once memorably, a wheelbarrow. He delivers tales of redemption, lessons about hope, and regular reminders that no one ever got to heaven by skipping bath day. The congregation listens in various stages of attention. The waller counts ceiling beams, the collector covertly inspects the hymnals for hidden notes, and Silent Mary sits in her favorite pew, eyes closed, possibly praying or possibly just napping with conviction. If you glance at the staff, you'll catch Nurse Perkins examining her cuticles and Big Sid suppressing a yawn. You're not the only one in need of salvation. Reverend Fairchild peppers his lessons with reminders that even in adversity, we are watched over, which is very easy for someone who gets to leave at 5 p.m. Still, there's something oddly comforting about the repetition of ritual, standing, sitting, kneeling, and reciting the same prayers as everyone else. For a brief moment, you're part of something bigger than your mattress and daily oatmeal. Even if that something is just a long list of sins you're expected to confess. Confession is handled in bulk, no individual soul-bearing here. The chaplain asks everyone to consider their failings in silence, which produces the only minute of quiet you'll hear all week. There's a collective shuffle of feet and a few guilty glances, as everyone internally debates whether complaining about the stew counts as a venial sin. Sometimes, the chapel hosts visiting speakers, clergy from nearby parishes who treat the asylum as a missionary field, or well-meaning volunteers with a box of tracts and an alarming fondness for group prayer. The Queen gives them a regal nod. The whistler tests their faith with an improvised solo. The rest of you smile politely and pray for a short sermon. Afterward, the chaplain reminds everyone to carry the light of hope back to the ward, even if the only thing you're carrying is the same existential anxiety you brought in with you. Still, a few manage to snag an extra candle stub or a leftover biscuit from the altar, small victories in a world of moral lectures. And so, faith becomes another routine, a set of rituals that bring a little structure, a little unity, and, occasionally, a little warmth. The sermons may be peculiar, the prayers repetitive, but there's comfort in the familiar, even if you suspect the chaplain's real miracle is surviving another winter in the draftiest room in the building. Communication is an art. If you want to get a message out, you'll need creativity, patience, and possibly a pigeon with a good sense of direction. Let's face it, conversation in the Victorian asylum is carefully monitored, and sending a simple note to a friend or loved one can feel like plotting a great train robbery. The staff believe that too much communication leads to excitability, and excitability, of course, leads straight to unwashed sheets and revolutionary ideas. So every message, from innocent requests for extra bread to secret love poems, must pass through an invisible gauntlet of eagle-eyed nurses and suspiciously attentive orderlies. The first line of defense is Nurse Perkins, who can spot a folded scrap of paper from 40 paces and has been known to confiscate everything from hand-drawn portraits to a heartfelt ode to oatmeal. Then there's Big Sid, who inspects outgoing mail with all the subtlety of a customs agent searching for gold bullion. If you want to get a note past the staff, you'll need more than neat handwriting. You'll need stealth, subtlety, and, ideally, a good distraction. Enter the asylum's underground network, a ragtag alliance of basket weavers, chess aficionados, and the occasional bored matron. The collector, ever resourceful, trades marbles and buttons for favors, acting as a sort of postmaster general for contraband notes. She's perfected the art of hiding messages in everything from a hollowed-out soap bar to a double-layered sock. If you ever notice someone counting their bread crusts with particular focus, there's a good chance they're actually reciting a ciphered message about the next yard time rendezvous. Codes abound. Some patients tap messages onto bed frames in patterns of 3 and 4, a primitive Morse code that even Nurse Perkins hasn't quite cracked. Others invent elaborate languages based on chess moves or the number of stitches in a line of darning. The Queen once devised a whole system using handkerchief folds, which the staff thought was just a sign of royal eccentricity. Only the insiders knew that a left-tucked corner meant "meet me by the mulberry bush at dusk." Then there are the great escapes of correspondence, actual letters to the outside world. Officially, these must be dictated to the clerk and checked for appropriate content. Unofficially, many a heartfelt message has left the building concealed inside the lining of a care package or even, in one legendary case, scrawled onto the back of a hymn sheet and smuggled out in the chaplain's pocket. The whistler's attempt to train a pigeon as a messenger ended in disaster when the bird developed a taste for communal porridge and refused to leave. But it's not just letters. The truly ambitious attempt to smuggle other objects, spoons for crafting, pebbles as keepsakes, or, in the case of the Waller, a full set of playing cards painstakingly illustrated on scraps of laundry ticket. Such contraband is passed hand to hand, bed to bed, through a series of stealthy exchanges that would impress any master spy. Occasionally, an item is intercepted and added to Big Sid's growing collection of interesting objects on display in the staff room as a warning to the next generation of would-be smugglers. Of course, the risk is real. If caught, you face a stern talking to, a week's worth of therapeutic silence, or, worst of all, the dreaded quiet room. Yet, the urge to reach out, to connect, to share news or jokes or simple kindness is irrepressible. It's part of what keeps the ward alive. A network of hope and resilience, stitched together in secret and sustained by whispers. So you learn to communicate in glances, to pass notes in code, and to see every spoon as a potential message bearer. You develop a camaraderie that can't be found in the official activities, one forged in secrecy, laughter, and the shared thrill of outsmarting the staff. Because in a world where your every word is suspect, even the smallest act of communication feels like a tiny revolution. And, who knows, maybe next time, the pigeon will finally make it past the kitchen. Hope springs eternal, even if, in the asylum, it travels by code, by contraband, or by crumb. Getting out is its own ordeal. The discharge process involves interviews, paperwork, and the unspoken question, are you actually better or just better at faking it? It starts quietly, sometimes with a whispered rumor, sometimes with a summons to the doctor's office, sometimes with a surprise visit from a distant relative who heard you might be coming home. Suddenly, your routine of gruel, group therapy, and communal towel wrangling is replaced by a flurry of forms and anxious speculation. The staff start watching you more closely, as if you might spontaneously combust into a confession or, worse, a heartfelt goodbye. First comes the interview, presided over by Dr. Pemberton and a committee of stern faces who haven't smiled since the invention of linoleum. You're asked to recount your feelings, recite the rules, and prove your readiness for the outside world by not mentioning pigeons, poetry, or escape plans. There's a checklist. Does the patient exhibit appropriate cheerfulness? Has the patient stopped naming inanimate objects? Will the patient promise never to mention the Queen's pet pigeon in public again? You smile, nod, and try not to let your mind wander to the possibility of turnips in the real world. Then there's the paperwork, an avalanche of signatures, waivers, and certificates. You sign a document, promising to eat your vegetables, attend church, and avoid undue excitement. There's a release form in triplicate and, inexplicably, a survey about the quality of the bread. The collector, who once forged a letter to the Queen herself, offers to help, but the staff decline. No one wants to risk a repeat of the "we are all cured" signed Napoleon Bonaparte incident. Next, your family is summoned for a solemn debriefing. They arrive armed with questions, concerns, and a suspiciously large fruit basket. You sit through a litany of reminders. Write often, don't forget your medicine. And please, no more limericks about Aunt Edna. Your mother cries, your father pats you on the shoulder, and your cousin tries to bribe the nurse for a tour of the quiet room. The whole scene is equal parts reunion and parole hearing. Before you leave, you're given back your old clothes, washed, mended, and smelling faintly of mothballs and nostalgia. You try them on and realize that, in a way, you've grown into them. They fit differently now, shaped by weeks or months or years of institutional life. You check your pockets for hidden notes, extra buttons, or one of the Whistler's lucky pebbles. The staff conduct one last inspection for contraband, and you're forced to hand over a pilfered spoon and an unauthorized drawing of Lord Peckerton. When the big moment arrives, it's strangely anticlimactic. The gates open. The staff wish you luck with varying degrees of sincerity. Some of your fellow patients wave, some avert their eyes, and Queen Victoria sends you off with a regal nod. You step outside into sunlight, or rain, or smog, depending on your luck, clutching a tiny bag of personal effects and a head full of questions. Now comes the hardest part. Re-entry into the real world. Everything seems louder, brighter, and less predictable. Ordinary things, a cart rattling down the street, a neighbor's laugh, the scent of fresh bread, feel miraculous and overwhelming. People expect you to pick up where you left off, as if your time in the asylum was just an especially long nap. You discover that your old life doesn't quite fit anymore, and that sometimes freedom means learning to build a new routine out of small, strange miracles. But you also carry with you a resilience, a pocketful of inside jokes, and the quiet knowledge that, whatever else happens, you once survived oatmeal that could bend a spoon. Whether freedom is a blessing or a brand new challenge, you face it the same way you faced every day in the asylum, with hope, humor, and the stubborn conviction that you're much harder to break than anyone thinks. Whether you leave the asylum or not, your story lingers, rumors, legends, and the occasional ghost story. Maybe you'll become a cautionary tale or just a punchline for the staff. Either way, the only thing more persistent than the walls is the human urge to survive. It's one of history's stranger truths. In places designed to contain, to erase, or to fix the broken pieces of the human mind, stories always manage to slip through the cracks. Years after you've gone, or even if you never leave, people still speak your name in whispers and winks. The Whistler's nocturnal tunes become a part of the building itself, cropping up in creaky floorboards and wind that seems to hum along. The Queen's regal speeches echo in new voices, as fresh arrivals try on crowns made of paper and dignity. Even the staff get in on the legend-making. Remember the patient who tried to bribe a pigeon with potato peelings? Nurse Perkins might say, shaking her head and smiling into her tea. Or the escape artist who only ever managed to hide in the laundry basket. Some tales grow wilder with every telling. The collector becomes a Robin Hood figure, sneaking bread and kindness to anyone in need. The Waller's tunnel to freedom gains another 5 feet and a secret exit each time the story is told. Sometimes, the legacy is less about names and more about moments. A poem scratched under a bed frame. A favorite bench in the muddy yard, worn smooth by years of secret meetings and slow afternoons. A spoon, bent and hidden in a floorboard, discovered by a future patient with a knack for scavenging and hope. These small traces form a map of resistance and resilience, a memory quilt passed hand to hand, year after year. Some stories, of course, drift into the supernatural. Asylums are famous for their ghosts, restless souls wandering the corridors, trailing the scent of lavender and stale porridge. Someone will swear they saw Silent Mary in the old chapel, nodding along to a hymn only she could hear. Others will claim the Whistler's song is sometimes audible, late at night, even though no one's played the piano in decades. The Queen naturally never quite leaves. Her portrait reappears, mysteriously, no matter how many times it's taken down. For those who do make it out, the outside world is never quite the same. Every crack in a sidewalk, every distant bell, brings you back to mornings in the ward. You find yourself folding napkins just so, humming tunes you can't place, trading bad puns with strangers, and feeling an odd kinship with anyone who has ever survived a truly terrible breakfast. Your story, reshaped by struggle and stubbornness, slips quietly into the lives of the people around you. An invisible badge of courage, a lesson in letting go. Inside, life goes on. New faces replace old ones. Rules are rewritten, routines rearranged, but the core remains. People yearning for meaning, connection, and, above all, a reason to laugh. Because laughter is the real legacy here. Jokes whispered behind the staff's back, mock royal decrees issued from a creaky bed, secret contests for who can hide the most spoons. The institution's greatest threat was never unruly patience, but the persistence of human humor, even in the gloomiest corners. So what happens next? You become part of something larger, a patchwork of memories, laughter, and quietly heroic acts. Maybe your story fades. Maybe it grows in the telling. Maybe it's rediscovered by someone who needs it most. But the mark you leave, however small, reminds everyone who follows that endurance isn't just about survival. Sometimes it's about hope, mischief, and the ability to find joy in even the strangest places. And that, perhaps, is the best kind of legacy. Congratulations! You've just been promoted from nervous wreck to assistant chamber pot scrubber. Patient jobs in the asylum are less about rehabilitation and more about keeping the place from collapsing into actual chaos. You might sweep floors, polish doorknobs, or serve as the world's least enthusiastic gardener. Payment? The smug satisfaction of knowing the hallway is slightly less sticky. Work assignments in the asylum are doled out each morning by Nurse Perkins, who maintains a rotating list on a clipboard, battered enough to have survived 3 pandemics and a kitchen fire. If your name appears, you're pressed into service, sometimes as a privilege, sometimes as a punishment, and sometimes, you suspect, just so the staff don't have to sweep the yard themselves. The jobs are legion and rarely glamorous. There's bed making with sheets that would rather be anywhere else, dusting the same shelf every day to ensure the dust learns its place, and collecting the inevitable trail of lost buttons, feathers, and mysterious fluff that seems to reproduce when no one's looking. The collector is in her element here. She regards every lost sock as a personal challenge, and once found a whole spoon wedged inside the piano. Then there's chamber pot duty. Armed with a bucket and a rag, you learn to master the art of holding your breath and thinking of literally anything else. If you're lucky, you'll only have to deal with your own ward. If not, it's off to the men's wing, where aromatic is a polite understatement, and there's always one resident convinced the pot is a wishing well. By the end of the week, your sense of smell has filed for early retirement. Floor sweeping is another classic. The halls seem to collect dust, mud, and mysterious stains faster than any human could hope to keep up. Your broom is sturdy but opinionated. It only likes to sweep in one direction and refuses to cooperate if you try to hurry. Still, there's a certain meditative quality to sweeping, especially in the early morning, when the only other sounds are the whistler tuning up for the day and the Queen issuing royal proclamations about breakfast. Polishing doorknobs is less a task than a test of patience. The asylum's doors are ancient, the knobs more tarnished than Nurse Perkins' sense of humour. You rub them with a bit of vinegar and a rag, watching your reflection slowly emerge, distorted and ghostly. If you manage a proper shine, there's a fleeting sense of triumph, until you remember that 5 more wards still await, and Big Sid is already checking your progress with his arms crossed and eyebrows arched. Gardening duties are assigned to the trusted patients, which means you get to battle the asylum's relentless weeds and chase pigeons off the only surviving cabbages. The garden is less Versailles, more scrappy potato patch, but you take what you can get. Sometimes you're allowed to plant seeds, turnips, carrots, the occasional mystery bulb, and watch them struggle valiantly against the English weather and the world's least motivated grounds crew. Officially, these jobs are meant to foster a sense of purpose, responsibility, and the noble virtue of industriousness. Unofficially, they're the asylum's insurance policy against total entropy. Still, there are unexpected moments of pride. A floor gleaming in the afternoon light, a freshly made bed, a patch of earth momentarily free of weeds. You and your fellow workers swap tips, jokes, and sometimes even actual help. The collector once started an informal contest for most artistic arrangement of lost buttons, and Silent Mary has been crowned Queen of the Polished Knobs 3 months running. At the end of the day, the pay remains the same. No coins, no tips, but a certain satisfaction in knowing you've imposed a little order on the chaos. And in a world ruled by rules and routines, even the smallest victory counts. After all, somewhere between the scrubbing and the sweeping, you remember, however briefly, that you are capable, you are useful, and at least for today, the hallway is a little less sticky. Beneath the endless grey routine, there's an unofficial news network powered by whispering patients and suspiciously chatty orderlies. Who's stealing bread? Who's hiding an extra blanket? Who claims to have seen the ghost of Dr. Bumble in the laundry chute? Gossip travels faster than a nurse with a new thermometer. And absolutely nothing stays secret for long, except, apparently, the recipe for edible soup. It all starts innocently enough. You're sitting in the corner of the ward, threading reeds for the world's least round basket, when the Waller leans over and whispers, "Did you hear about the gruel this morning? Apparently, someone spotted a potato with actual flavor, and now the whole ward is abuzz with theories. Was it a kitchen accident, a secret delivery, or just a hallucination brought on by too much turnip? No one knows, but that won't stop speculation from running wild. Every patient is both a news source and an audience. The collector operates like an underworld kingpin, swapping tidbits of information for buttons, crusts, or, on rare and dangerous occasions, a quick peek at the smuggled deck of hand-drawn playing cards. The Whistler trades in secrets as well, communicating mostly in code. 3 sharp whistles for Big Sid is coming, 1 long one for someone's crying in the linen closet again. There's always something to talk about. Who's getting extra bread at breakfast? Rumor. The Queen bribed an orderly with a poem about socks. Who's been sneaking out to the garden at night? Possible suspects. The Waller. And a very nimble pigeon. Who's been caught with a forbidden book, or scandal of scandals? A pencil not issued by Nurse Perkins. The staff try to crack down, but you suspect even they enjoy the entertainment. There's only so much therapeutic silence one can take before a good story becomes a survival necessity. Rivalries emerge and fade with the phases of the moon. The Queen and the Collector are locked in an ongoing dispute over blanket territory, with both sides laying claim to the corner bed by royal decree or by right of possession since last Wednesday. The Snorer and Silent Mary have an unspoken competition over who can keep the ward awake longer, one with volume, the other with the world's most dramatic size. Bets are placed in bread crusts and IOUs, and the outcomes are hotly debated until the next scandal comes along. Then there are the ghost stories. Every asylum worth its salt has a haunted laundry chute, and yours is no exception. Dr. Bumble, former director and reputed enthusiast for unnecessary leeches, is said to roam the halls at night, jangling a ring of ghostly keys and muttering about patient files lost to the ages. The Waller claims she saw his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The Queen insists he once complimented her on her basket weaving. Even Big Sid pretends not to believe, but you've seen him avoid the west staircase after midnight. Orderlies, too, get in on the fun. Miss Tiddle, for example, is famous for her accidental hints, mentioning that Nurse Perkins has a secret stash of jam, or that the director's favorite cup went missing after last inspection. These tidbits are pounced upon, dissected, and inevitably embellished by the patients until the original story is barely recognizable. The best part? Gossip is democratic. It crosses beds, age, diagnosis, and even time. Old stories mix with new, and every tale gets a little wilder in the retelling. It's a safety valve, a secret language, and a way for everyone, from the most boisterous to the most silent, to feel connected. So, as you settle into another grey evening and hear the latest rumour ripple through the ward, remember, in the asylum, the greatest rebellion isn't running away, it's running your mouth. And if you hear footsteps in the laundry chute late at night, well, maybe just tuck your blanket a little tighter, just in case. If you're lucky enough to be chosen for the experimental wing, prepare for medical innovation, Victorian style. Here, Doctors test new cures, which range from therapeutic spinning to drinking mercury, or wearing a hat that allegedly reads your thoughts. If you hear the words galvanic battery or restorative syrup, run, unless you want to glow in the dark. It all begins with a summons, a slip of paper, a nod from Nurse Perkins, or simply your name announced with ominous cheer at breakfast. The staff refer to it as an opportunity. You suspect it's a trap. Down a corridor lined with flickering gas lamps, you're ushered into the hallowed halls of science, Victorian edition, which means it's equal parts hopeful, curiosity, and pure, unfiltered madness. The experimental wing is an institution within an institution. The staff here are a special breed, doctors with wild hair, suspicious stains on their waistcoats, and a glint in the eye that says, "I've read at least half of a medical journal, and now I want to try something." You're greeted by Dr. Havisham, who sports a monocle, a notebook, and a disconcerting enthusiasm for the phrase, "We're making history today." The first innovation you encounter is the spinning chair. You're seated, strapped in for safety, and given a lecture on the benefits of cerebral redistribution. The theory is that spinning at high speed will realign your humors, clear your thoughts, and maybe, just maybe, fling the sadness clean out of your ears. In reality, you emerge dizzy, nauseous, and convinced that lunch was a tactical error. Dr. Havisham records your increased vibrancy, while Nurse Malvern stands by with a mop, just in case. Then there's electrotherapy, starring the legendary galvanic battery. Wires are attached to your temples, the current is applied, and the resulting jolt is supposed to reinvigorate the nerves. The staff assure you it's cutting-edge science. You suspect it's the only way to make your hair stand on end while sitting down. Occasionally, sparks fly and the lights flicker, a sure sign, according to the doctor, that progress is being made. On days when the doctors are feeling particularly adventurous, it's time for medicinal tonics. These range from restorative syrup, containing alcohol, opium, and the tears of previous patients, to the infamous mercury draft. The taste is unforgettable, somewhere between a penny and a lightning storm. The after effects? Let's just say you might not sleep for 2 days, but you'll have very shiny teeth. The Queen insists the syrup gives her visions of empire. The Whistler refuses to comment, but his eyebrows haven't stopped twitching since Tuesday. The experimental hat deserves special mention. Constructed from copper wire, velvet, and the crushed dreams of several failed inventors, it promises to read the mind and align the soul. You're told to wear it for exactly 43 minutes while thinking only positive thoughts. The staff take notes, adjust the dials, and peer at you as if you're about to sprout wings. When it's over, you feel no different, though you do attract pigeons in the yard for the rest of the week. Sometimes they test herbal remedies, odd-smelling poultices, tinctures that claim to cure excessive excitement, or teas brewed from things that probably shouldn't be brewed at all. The collector volunteers for these in exchange for buttons, and occasionally turns green, which is noted in the records as unexpected enthusiasm. Results are meticulously recorded. Dr. Havisham's ledger is filled with lines like, "Patient spun for 5 minutes, claims to see colors," or administered syrup, "Patient now reciting Latin, possibly possessed." The experiments rarely have lasting effects. Aside from the stories, the shudders, and the odd sense that, just this once, you might have helped science, or at least given it a stern warning. So, if you find yourself summoned to the experimental wing, remember, chin up, brace yourself, and always ask what's in the syrup before you drink it. In the Victorian Asylum, medical progress marches on, occasionally over your dignity, but always in the name of discovery, and possibly in the hope that this time the hat will finally work. It's Christmas, or maybe Easter, or possibly just Thursday. But the staff insists it's a holiday. There's a wreath made of old socks, a tree decorated with buttons and anxiety, and a special meal featuring slightly fresher potatoes. For 5 minutes, everyone is slightly less miserable, and you almost remember what hope felt like before someone stole your pudding. Holiday spirit in the asylum is a curious thing. The staff prepare for weeks, if only to distract themselves from the monotony of porridge and weather reports. Nurse Perkins takes inventory of the decorations, which this year include a tangle of twine, 2 faded paper angels, and a garland so threadbare it looks like a suggestion rather than an actual object. The collector organizes a search party for lost baubles, buttons, bits of ribbon, and anything shiny enough to catch a patient's eye. Queen Victoria, of course, demands her own coronation. With Silent Mary as the world's most stoic handmaiden, the festive mood starts at breakfast. When the kitchen produces something special, this usually means the potatoes are slightly less grey. The bread is marginally less like roofing tile. And there's even a rumour of a real egg lurking somewhere in the stew. The whistler leads the ward in a tentative rendition of God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, while the waller insists on reciting the 12 Days of Christmas, substituting pigeons in the yard for partridges in a pear tree. Even Big Sid cracks a smile when presented with his honorary Santa hat, knitted from leftover scarf yarn and roughly the size of a tea cozy. The decorating is, predictably, a group effort. One patient untangles the twine, another drapes it over the least crooked chair, and everyone is encouraged to add their own touch. By lunchtime, the tree, usually a battered broom propped in a bucket, boasts a dazzling array of old buttons, bits of cloth, and the occasional spoon smuggled out of the dining hall. There's even a star, lovingly fashioned from a leftover sardine tin, perched precariously on top. Games and entertainments are scheduled, mostly as an excuse to keep everyone occupied while the kitchen staff panic over the logistics of boiling 3 different vegetables at once. There's guess what's in the pudding. Answer: always, unfortunately, raisins. A contest to see who can best impersonate. Nurse Perkins. Winner: the collector, with a withering glare and a perfect imitation of her no-fun voice, and the annual Find the Festive Turnip scavenger hunt. The Queen delivers her holiday address from the head of the table, declaring this the finest assembly of gentlefolk and root vegetables in the kingdom. Visiting day is usually scheduled to coincide with the holiday, so families arrive with baskets of bruised apples, lumpy cakes, and an abundance of questions about the menu. There's laughter, awkward hugs, and, for a brief moment, an almost normal feeling, like the world outside is just a little bit closer. Gifts are exchanged. A new hair ribbon, a warm pair of socks, a precious pencil. The staff distribute hard candy and extra rations, even if only to keep the peace. After the feast, if one can call it that, the ward gathers for the official group photo. A sepia-toned lineup of weary faces and forced smiles, forever immortalized in a frame decorated with more buttons. For a few precious minutes, the air is thick with the possibility of joy. Even the pigeons outside seem to celebrate, swooping in for leftover crumbs and honorary mentions in the Queen's speech. Of course, all holidays must end. The tree is disassembled, the socks are reclaimed, and the garland is packed away to hibernate until the next occasion. The potatoes return to their usual shade of uncertainty. But for a little while, you remember what it feels like to belong, to share laughter, hope, and a collective dream that things might get better, one slightly fresher potato at a time. And really, isn't that the true spirit of the season? Even in the world's strangest halls, a little bit of hope, and maybe a festive turnip, goes a very long way. So tonight, as you drift off, safe in your own bed, with soft sheets, climate control, and a complete absence of suspicious buckets, Maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the souls who survived the Victorian asylum system, the ones who endured endless gruel, involuntary haircuts, and therapy that involved more restraints than resolutions. The ones who never got to pick their roommates, and whose treatment plans sometimes looked suspiciously like creative torture disguised as science. Because history, as it turns out, is not just gross and horrifying, it's proof that people are astonishingly resilient. Even in a world of soggy mattresses and windowless wards, humor found a way to sneak in. People traded stories, smuggled contraband spoons, and even managed to celebrate a holiday or two with nothing but turnip soup and desperate optimism. That urge to survive, to laugh at the absurd, to find a scrap of comfort in the bleakness, maybe that's the real secret to the human story. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, maybe take a deep breath and savor the luxury of silence, privacy, and the ability to lock your door from the inside. Be grateful for central heating, real pillows, and medical care that, most of the time, doesn't involve being spun in a chair until you forget your name. The next time life feels overwhelming, remember, you are the distant descendant of people who faced the worst and found a way to keep going anyway. Sleep well, dream soft, and remember, no matter how bad your day was, at least nobody tried to cure it by feeding you cabbage water or reading your mind with a hat. Good night, and may your rest be as peaceful as a Victorian asylum wasn't.